I'm Roger Stone for InfoWars, and you're here at the War Room. My colleagues, both sporting their navy blue suits today, must have known I was going to be on. And I must tell you, when you have been to the House Intelligence Committee for an interrogation, reminds me a great deal of a proctological examination. While the proceeding was courteous and professional, the Democrats engaged in a series of gotcha questions designed to catch you in a half-truth or a mistruth over arcane nonsense, while the Republicans, by and large, stuck to the actual charge of the committee, that being to determine whether there was collusion, conspiracy, or coordination between anyone in Trump world and the Russian state or any Russian company or individual. Now, after the proceedings, Mr. Schiff, the ranking Democrat, came out to say that Stone had been put in touch with Assange, who is a Russian asset, and he was questioned about this before the committee. Now, again, he repeats the falsehood that for which there is no proof whatsoever that Julian Assange or WikiLeaks are assets or controlled by the Russians. This is a false narrative repeated endlessly by our communications agencies, but with no documentation. When Mr. Comey was before this very same committee that I testified for, and he was asked about it, he said, yes, we think they used some kind of a cutout. Sounds rather imprecise to me. But the New York Times, in a piece by Yamachi Al-Sindor, a reporter I'm unaware of, do not know, incorrectly reported that I declined to tell the committee the name of a journalist who had, quote, connected me with Guccifer 2.0. This is completely incorrect. I declined to name a journalist who I had asked to confirm a tweet of WikiLeaks of July 21st, in which they made it clear that they had devastating information on Hillary Clinton and that they would release it. So twice in this article, it is incorrect. I never, there was no journalist in between. I reached out to the persona I thought was Guccifer 2.0 after he had been suspended and then reinstated on Twitter. I do not believe then, and I do not believe now, that he is a Russian asset. If he is a Russian asset, why is the software he is using registered to an employee at the Democratic National Committee? There's something for the committee to focus on. Now, Representative Schiff said I would be subpoenaed if I did not provide this information to the committee. Trey Gowdy, who I think is a fine legislator and a good man, expressed an interest in knowing who this contact was. And I assured the committee that if I could convince the journalist in question to release me of the journalistic shield, release me from our off-the-record conversation, I would be happy to disclose his name to the committee, and he can then confirm what I have told the committee, that I had no direct conversation with Julian Assange during the presidential campaign year. So I am most anxious to get, the New York Times to correct this little item. The other interesting part about all of this is that I also have to correct a misstatement of my own. I did say in my press stand-up that I believed that my lawyers had heard from Manafort's lawyers that he would be indicted. That was an incorrect assumption of mine, based on the fact that my lawyers made that observation after a meeting with Manafort's lawyers, or a communication. But in fact, my lawyers learned this from publicly available documents. So I apologize for the misunderstanding. The net result of it remains the same. I still believe that Robert Mueller will seek to unfairly squeeze Manafort in an effort to get him to roll over on the President of the United States, which I do not think he is going to do. They would have to manufacture some crime by the president. There is no Russian collusion. And I once again made it very clear to the committee that I had no advance notice of the hacking of John Podesta's emails. There is no evidence to the contrary, that I had no advanced knowledge of the source or content of the emails published in October by WikiLeaks, and that my communications with Guccifer 2.0, who I vigorously contest as a Russian asset, are based on the substance, context, and content entirely benign and after the fact. So perhaps the U.S. Senate committee inquiry will raise the same questions. But again, there are two central questions here. One is the question of, did the Russians attempt to interfere in our election? The other is the question of, did somebody in the Trump camp, a Trump friend, a family member, associate, campaign staffer, collude with the Russians, conspire with the Russians, coordinate with the Russians? The answer to the first one is perhaps, because we now see that the Russians appear to have, or some Russian entity appears to have purchased Facebook ads that seem to have a political intent. I do think this is kind of like urinating into the ocean in terms of moving public opinion, but it would be typical of the ham-handed actions of the Russians, who really don't understand our politics. The entire Guccifer is a Russian thing was invented in order to get the Stone admits he talks to Russian intelligence asset headline that is so completely fake news. And that, I think, has to be addressed. So we're finally getting to the point where the steam is running out of the Russian canard, the myth, the fairy tale that Donald Trump and his associates colluded with the Russians. Still no evidence has been found. I've talked about the Donnie Trump Jr. Case, and you're well familiar with it. Now would be a good time to tell you that we do need your support at InfoWars. We are the tip of the spear in the revolution. And Brain Force right now, which is among my favorite products, is available at an extraordinary 50% discount. Now, I get mental clarity and organization out of this. It is used throughout the Stone family. My grandson Nick likes it as well. So you will never see this price again. Again, Brain Force 50% off. Act on this today and help us support the revolution. I'm Roger Stone here on the War Room. Many of you may know that there are about 3,100 files still sealed in the National Archives regarding the Kennedy assassination. Under the 1992 JFK Records Act, the archives have until July 26th to decide which of those files will be publicly disclosed. This is one of several tranches of documents that the government has already released. Some of the documents that we've seen previously showed that J. Edgar Hoover, for example, had directed the head of the FBI in Dallas to brief George Bush of the CIA about certain aspects of the Kennedy assassination. We also found that the KGB had conducted their own investigation into the events of November 22nd, 1963, and they had concluded that President John F. Kennedy was murdered by Vice President Lyndon Baines Johnson. We also learned that Jacqueline Kennedy had gone to French intelligence, who had conducted their own independent investigation at her request, which they published in book form. They also conclude that Lyndon Johnson was the centerpiece of a plot to kill John F. Kennedy. So what will happen now? We do know that among the documents that are waiting to be seen are a CIA personality study of Oswald, top secret testimony of former CIA officers to congressional committees, transcripts of interrogations with the Soviet defector and Oswald handler Yuri Nosenko, letters about the case from J. Edgar Hoover and Jacqueline Kennedy, the CIA files on Jack Wasserman, the attorney for New Orleans mob boss Carlos Marcello, and the operational files of E. Howard Hunt, career spy, CIA veteran, and Watergate burglar. E. Howard Hunt, of course, had admitted on his deathbed in an extraordinary series of tapes with his son, St. John Hunt, that he was on the ground in Dallas, that it was indeed an agency operation, at least partially, and that he was, as he described himself, a backbencher. Joining me, therefore, in calling on President Trump, who has the ultimate authority over these records, to choose transparency, is Gerald Posner. Gerald Posner is, of course, the author of the 1993 bestseller, Case Closed, Lee Harvey Oswald and the Assassination of JFK. Some of you may know that Mr. Posner and I debated that very question last November, and are likely to do so again via Skype this November. I had hoped to get Mr. Posner on the program today, and he may yet make the scene, but he has joined me in calling for the president to release these records. Now, Mr. Posner and I are both New York Times best-selling authors. We are diametrically opposed on this question. In my book, The Man Who Killed Kennedy, The Case Against LBJ, which you can get at Amazon or Barnes & Noble or Books A Million or a dozen other. You can go to the Stone Cold Truth site, I believe, and you can get my book, or you can adhere to Mr. Posner's book, Case Closed, with which I vehemently disagree. But we agree on one thing, and that is the president should not give in to CIA Director Pompeo. And evidently, Mike Pompeo has been lobbying the president to delay the release of these records for another 25 years. Now, it is instructive that when the Bay of Pigs records, which were on a different schedule, came up for release by President Barack Obama, the Central Intelligence Agency successfully argued that those records should also be suppressed for another 25 years. How this makes any sense absolutely remains to be seen. It is absolutely clear that everyone involved in the CIA at that time is deceased, that there is no government official still in high office who was in office at that time. So it is hard to figure out what it is the deep state wishes to conceal. But I have reached the conclusion that, and therefore put out a statement today with Gerald Posner, both calling on the president to release these records. We'll keep you posted right here at the InfoWars. There he is, Gerald Posner himself. Counselor,
Roger,
welcome to InfoWars.
I'm glad to be on it. I mean, this may be the first time that anybody has actually been on InfoWars who believes that Lee Harvey Oswald might have killed the president on his own. So I understand this is a rather historic moment. But I think that you and I agree on two things on the Kennedy assassination. We agree on the date that Kennedy was killed. Then we really don't agree on much more than that as we go down the road. But we do agree on this, what you were just talking about a moment ago, and that is the overused word transparency. If it's needed, I've been an advocate for years. Let's get these files out. One of the reasons that people had no faith in the Warren Commission, besides the fact that Ruby killed Oswald, besides the fact that there were all types of questions with the autopsy, despite the fact of this so-called single bullet, despite Oliver Stone's film and your book and many others, is because they sealed tens of thousands of documents after the assassination, kept them from public view for decades, and people started to think, you know what, these guys have something to hide. I believe what they had to hide is they were covering their own bureaucratic asses. The CIA was lying to the Warren Commission because it didn't want the commission to find out that they were in league with the mob to try to kill Castro. The FBI was lying to the Warren Commission because they were afraid they hadn't looked into Jack Ruby's mob contacts, and they had a file open on Oswald, and they were afraid that somebody would say, you guys knew he was that crazy, you didn't do something about him. So everybody was running for cover. But the only way we will know is get these files out. So George Bush, the elder, back in '92, signed the JFK Records Act. It means 25 years to release everything. And as you said, we're down to about 3,100 key documents. If the CIA, Pompeo, and others refuse to release them, it goes to your friend Donald Trump, and hopefully he will say, yes, get them out there. Let's take a look at them.
Well, Gerald, you know my view, and that, of course, is that nobody in their right mind could honestly believe that Oswald killed Kennedy and acted alone. But you are a great lawyer and a great advocate for your point of view. The important thing here is that you and I, totally polar opposites on this question, agree on your right, not much other than the date. We come together to call for a final release. Why does this cover-up continue? What public good, what public benefit can there be from this continuing act? I'm disturbed by the fact that the Bay of Pigs records were suppressed for another 25 years. I find Mr. Pompeo a little tough to understand. He used to be a fairly reasonable right-of-center Republican congressman. These days, he seems to be captive of the mandarins of the CIA and those who believe incorrectly that Julian Assange is a Russian asset and so on. And I hope the president will ignore his advice on this subject. So I salute you. I thank you for joining us on InfoWars. You're right. You'll probably never be back. Thank you, Gerald Posner.
Thanks, Roger. Bye.
If you haven't had a chance, folks, now is a superb time to go to the Infowars.com store, because we don't have George Soros writing us multi-million-dollar checks in the wings. We have to depend on you.
So I told you this was going to happen last night. Every time there's a mass shooting, we tell you this is going to happen. They're going to try and come for our guns. Here's a tweet. Senator Richard Blumenthal calls for gun control legislation on MSNBC. Congress has been complicit. We ought to honor the victims by acting. Lena Dunham. Gun control is the only answer to a question we shouldn't even be asking. Ashley Tisdale. I don't want to react anymore. I want to respond. Notice these people all have armed security. Right? They lived in armed palaces. The senators have armed guards. But they want you to be unarmed. Here's the New Republic back in 2015. It's time to ban guns. Yes, all of them. Ban guns, all guns. Get rid of guns in homes, on the streets, and as much as possible on police. Now, let me ask you this question. And we're going to go. The reason I'm jumping in here, Roger, is because we have some breaking news from a caller from Las Vegas who's been there all night. I want to go to him in 1 second. How many criminals are going to turn in their guns when asked to? How many? Anybody got an answer? It's a big fat zero.
None.
They're not going to. Criminals don't turn in their guns because they're criminals, and they're going to keep their guns. So just remember that when you call for gun control legislation, the only ones who will have guns will be the criminals, and you will be overrun. You will be a victim. So don't forget that. Now let's go to Luca in Las Vegas, who's been in Vegas all night, and he says he's confirming multiple shooters. Go ahead, Luca. Where were you staying last night?
I was about 4 miles out. I heard the shot. I heard the responders. But what's interesting to me is there's about 5 shooters. It's just not adding up. I have friends that were at the concert. So there's 1 dead. They're saying there's 2 wounded and 3 missing. But, they're only saying there's 1 suspect. And he was
Who's they? Can you clarify real quick?
Yeah, who's saying they?
Police Department.
Okay. And they're saying they have 1 suspect dead and 2 missing?
No, that's what I got on the scanner last night. But the press release is saying they only have 1 lone wolf suspect right now.
But then on the police scanners, they're saying they're missing 2, which could be that couple that people were alluding to earlier in the night.
They're missing 2's wounded, they said, and 3 is missing. And I was listening to it all through the night for about 8 hours. And another thing that's interesting is if you look at the numbers, 9/11/01, the festival's called Route 91 on October 1st, 9/1/10/1. Now, I'm not a conspiracy guy, but that was just odd to me that I had to bring that up to you guys. But there is multiple shooters. There's multiple angles. I don't know what to say. They're hiding something. I wish I could figure it out. But I mean, I was on the police scanner all night, and reports of multiple hotels, multiple shots, multiple shooters, and they're only saying one suspect right now. It's real odd.
Yeah, I was seeing tweets last night. The Bellagio was also reporting shots, but then when I did some further digging, that was from March 25th. So it's very interesting. So you're claiming they killed one, 2 were wounded, and 3 are missing. That would be 5 shooters in total. That's what you're saying.
Right. And last night, I mean, they said 6, but it went down to 5 a couple minutes later. But there's shots reported, multiple casinos, multiple shots from different spots, and it was confirmed that it was automatic rifles.
Yeah.
And the police.
What you can hear from the video.
They're trying to say it's semi-auto.
Well, like we were saying earlier in the show, I don't know if you're listening, it could have been a semi-auto rifle outfitted with some sort of trigger device in order to make it shoot at a higher rate of speed.
It's like a little crank.
Yeah, it's just not adding up. I don't know why they're saying there's one guy trying to make the public feel safer, but I mean, no one here feels safe. Everyone knows that there's more than one guy, and I don't know what their motive is by saying, one suspect. It's not helping anyone.
Well, we played video from 2 witnesses earlier who were adamant that there was multiple shooters. They're adamant about it. And then we played the video from the young lady who said she saw a lady getting a confrontation saying, "You're all going to die, you're all going to die here."
Right,
and then 45 minutes later, people are shot.
Right, and there's some alarming things about what that lady said, too. I mean, they kind of, from what I've seen, they kind of locked the exits after that lady came in. And the guy had over 10 firearms in his room, and they're saying that the other suspects had more.
Wow. Well, I would say do you have recordings of this scanner footage, or were you just listening to it live?
I was just listening to it live. I was actually streaming it last night because the police scanner were getting overloaded, so I started streaming it on my own. I had about, I don't know how many thousand. I had a couple thousand listeners. I don't have anything recorded, but, I mean, everyone in Vegas right now knows that there's more than one shooter. Everyone knows.
All right, well, let's get Roger Stone's reaction to this. Roger, what do you think of this? You're hearing one shooter at the end of the night, but now we have witnesses saying multiple shooters, and we just had this guy listening to the scanner, Luca in Las Vegas, saying there could be 5 shooters.
Really what this points out is the new technology really lends itself to citizen journalism. Before the internet, before InfoWars, before the ability to listen to the police radio scans, we would have taken the government's word for whatever happened. They would tell us what would happen, and we would believe it. Now, it's not clear whether there's one shooter or whether there's 50, but I think it is very healthy that we can even discuss and pursue all of the leads without counting on the mainstream media to define for us the narrative that they then will flip and use an excuse to take our guns, no matter what the facts are. So I actually think it's very interesting to see it unfold.
It is, and it's flowing fast and furious, to take the name from the gun running program, where our government was sending guns down to Mexico to try and blame the Second Amendment. So anytime the liberals can blame the Second Amendment, they do that. I want to go to one more caller who's been waiting for a while, Roger, and then you can get back to your interview. Let's go to Steve in California. He wants to talk about sniper logistics. Steve, do you have experience in this field?
No, I've studied it for, 10, 15 years. I own several weapons myself, my wife and I. But as you know, if the shooter was on, let's say, the 30th floor, 32nd, whatever, that's around 450 feet. And Pythagorean theory, you have to take the height and the distance and subtract the in-between. C plus A equals B. And that's around 300 yards. A belt-fed machine gun would be that. I don't think that was a strobe light. That was obviously muzzle flash. And I was in the hotel and casino, or hotel and nightclub business for 30 years. And you don't put a strobe light in the middle of a hotel on the 4th story up. And 2, the professional hit team would have knocked that window out with some sort of heat source, and then put the window right back in, glued it back in, and been out of there in probably 3 minutes when the super quick drying glue. So if anybody gets to get in there, they need to look for the window change in that room somewhere on the 4th floor where the window has been glued out and glued back in so fast. And that was because the bullets they start tumbling after 100, 200 yards. It's not 5.
Well, they haven't even said what caliber it is yet. And, we're not talking about someone, going and precisely shooting. There's a fish in the barrel kind of situation. There's 22,000 people down below, and they're just, spraying rounds into the crowd. So, yeah, I understand, your distance and ballistics and all that. But even 300 yards with, a larger caliber rifle is going to be deadly, and obviously was deadly.
I must say, I'm impressed with Brother Zimmerman's knowledge of the of firearms technology here. It's illuminating, in all seriousness. Just the fact that we're asking all these questions, that people are calling in this kind of vital information, shows you, that this is the new news source. You won't hear this on CNN. They'll only tell you the government line. Here at InfoWars, we're committed to bring you what's happening as it happens.
And most of these reporters don't have this type of knowledge. They're not thinking about firearms in that way, because probably most of them don't shoot. Most of them probably just go along about their life, hoping they have armed guards around them at all times to protect them. Meanwhile, here at InfoWars, we talk about self-sufficiency, self-reliance, protect yourself, protect your family, don't wait for the police. And that's the mindset that we have going forward. So anytime something like this happens, those are the questions that we are asking here. Steve, thanks for calling. We got a minute left. Sean in California, I'll give you a minute, and we're going to break, so make it quick.
How's it going?
Going great. Go ahead.
Pleasure to speak to all you guys. I just wanted to point out that I'm not a gun expert, but I am an enthusiast. And going back to, I think it was 92 when Hollywood had that big, robbery, they were using, I think, AK-47s, but modified. And it kind of reminded me of the same sort of style that maybe could have been pushing out of the fire, like the actual, firepower. But like I said, I'm only an enthusiast,
Sure. Well, no, I remember when that happened. I remember that breaking out on TV.
And we'd just like to hear, in the next day or so, what guns were used.
What kind of guns were used?
You're telling us there's 10 of them. Sure, tell us what was used.
All right, we'll be back with Roger Stone and his guest, Gerald Posner. And once again, you can support us at InfoWarsStore.com. You're watching The War Room at InfoWars.com/show. Thanks for watching.
2 Step.